So first things first, I was on a call earlier today with my Wire members, and they are avid listeners and an avid audience for this show. And they said, "Oh my gosh, we got Patty's email yesterday or on Tuesday. Yeah, yesterday. And it said inflation is up. What the heck is going on?" So, Patty, can you give us a quick market update? And then I heard there was something about capital gains tax circulating today. I just can't keep up.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I mean, it is an election year, so there is a lot going on. And I appreciate that, that there's feedback coming in from the emails. I just want to make a quick note about that because the community of people that do follow us and listen are also very much interested in growing their businesses as a result of that newsletter that really Kalani put her foot on my neck and made me create. I got like 3 new escrows this week from people that have been following along. So sometimes what happens is you're going to get people that you initiate a conversation with today and it doesn't turn into anything for 2 months, 2 weeks, maybe 2 years, but stay in front of them and keep those going. So just remember all the little things you're doing are adding up. And that is the benefit of compounding interest, right? In life and everything. So we talk about that a lot. So inflation is up. Inflation has been up. All the reports for the last 3 months have been indicating that inflation is back on the rise. And just as a reminder to our listeners that you guys have to remember that when inflation, the reason why you're seeing changes to mortgage rates, which impact a lot of people because it impacts demand, it also impacts supply because there's a lot of people waiting for rates to go down to sell. So you have to remember that the market is responding to what they think the Fed is not going to do. So when the probability of a rate cut in March was at 90%, mortgage rates were down to the mid to low sixes. And now that the probability of a rate cut in September is not even at 50%, you see mortgage rates going back up and the possibility of that. And the conversation is there a potential for another hike on the table? Will interest rates go back over 8%? And all of these questions are circulating around these inflation reports. Another key element to what the Fed is looking at very specifically is the job report, right? So you're seeing for the last 3 months, December, January, February, March, you're seeing job openings rise. That means new jobs, over 300,000 jobs a month that are coming onto the market. And I know people don't think about employment as an element of inflation, but it is. That's inflationary. That's putting pressure. Why? Because if you are a business owner, you know that you're not hiring anyone or putting out an opportunity to hire people if you're not making money. That means in a high interest rate environment with less access to money and access to money at a higher cost, your business is still growing. Now, there's a lot of scrutiny and there's a lot of criticism coming out against those reports. And if you've been on my webinar, you read my newsletter, you know that I've been calling that out for a long time. So you will see that the numbers are might be a little, rigged because they're constantly being readjusted and heading downward. So what does that mean for inflation? It means that as long as there are more jobs coming on the market and people are spending money, prices of goods and services go up because the demand cannot keep up. The demand is outpacing the supply. The price of anything goes up when more people want it than the quantity of what that item is that's available, whether it's a product or service. So those are basic fundamentals. Also in the webinar series and on the newsletters, we have highlighted the basic understanding that you need to have when you're looking at how to make decisions on where price is headed is basic supply and demand. Okay. So you're going to see inflation, a big report come out Friday. So you want to stay tuned on my Instagram. If you want to get those updates in real time, I send them out early in the morning. I'm an early bird.
I think she paused. Yep, she froze. Yeah.
She froze on us. That's okay.
Okay, so while we're waiting on her to come back, I mean, just to kind of break it down a little bit more, I guess, I don't know if you guys will be able to answer this question. How the heck are people going to afford to live? Life is already expensive. I mean, like, let's just talk about what the real is. Like, I just don't and then we're talking about election season coming up. Obviously, this is something under the Biden administration. We already know what the election is going to look like. So it kind of sucks in a way because we're limited on who we can choose to put in office. But obviously, I hate to say it, this administration has not done a great job for the everyday consumer, right? So, I mean,
also, I think you need to think like about politics and administration. And as much as we can blame this administration, which I'm not a political person, even though I have a whole political public policy degree. But every administration
How'd that
is
happen? I got a whole public
I know,
policy
that's why I had to
degree.
laugh. I'm like, it's all right, girl. I got a PR degree and I can't write a press release to save my life. It's all good. It
but
happens.
we're trying, like, there's a lag between administrations, so each administration is always like cleaning up after the past administration, so on and so forth. But that's neither here
Mhm.
nor there. We're not in a great place financially as an economy, even though we're fueling all these wars and all this kind of stuff. But that's a whole nother subject for a whole nother day. But I think what people tend to do in these situations, especially in our consumerist society, is not think about, oh, these are hard times. Let me cut back. Let me think about what my essential spends are and just focus on
Mhm.
those things. What we do is we just start to accumulate debt. And
Right.
so people kind of put blinders on and then go into situations where, they just put things on credit cards, borrow from their retirement accounts, like we've talked about before. And if that is the case for you, I want you to just take a moment and actually understand the long-term consequences of that. And most of the time, we don't even know what we're spending on. So if you find that's your situation, and I'm not talking about for essential things. Obviously, there are a lot of people just struggling for day-to-day survival. But what
Mhm.
we see and what we have talked about is just an urge to keep on being a consumer and buy things off of TikTok shop and the $5 section in Target and all of these things. If we can really just be intentional about our spending and just focus on the things that are essential and just understand that this is a temporary season, then we can be in a much better financially healthy situation for the long term. So think about your future self.
Mhm. So
Sometimes I feel
Patty, I
like
know
it's not
you
temporary though, because I feel like the inflation has been inflating for a very long time now.
But
right. So
everything is cyclical. Yeah.
that's kind of my question though, Patty, and you had just frozen for a quick second. You weren't gone long,
Oh.
but the question really for me is if we're going, slow and steady, right? There haven't been any rate cuts, haven't been any rate hikes, but the minute that the Fed stopped hiking rates, inflation started to go back up, in spite of the progress that we've made getting that core inflation rate down. So, I mean, at how long and how steady do we go until the government has to be hawkish again?
Well, I think that's a great question, but I want to correct one thing that you said. The Fed stopped cutting rates in the summer of last year, and inflation didn't start picking up again until the January, February, and March reports. So it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't an instant effect. And it actually, you could argue that it wasn't necessarily the rate hikes that drove inflation down, because you're going to see that does happen, but it takes time. And I think that's what the Federal Reserve has reiterated over and over again. It takes time to see the impact, which is why they stopped hiking the rates. Now, when they stopped hiking the rates, that's when the market said, oh, okay, interest rates can drop now. Mortgage-backed securities can drop now. We're going to start to see this turning around. So bond investors feel more confident and spend more money, driving bond prices up and mortgage rates down. So specifically in regards to inflation, the problem is that when you're looking at a report today, it's not measuring the rate of inflation is not measuring the difference in it's taking what's let's say we're in the week of it's April 24th. So it's looking at April's information from April 20th, it's the same time exactly 1 year ago, and it's measuring the rate of change in that. So what's happening is the price is going down, the rate of that change is slowing down, and therefore that means, hey, this is a marker, this is an indicator that inflation is going back up. The prices, that means that instead of heading downwards, we're seeing this turn around, and that's not necessarily what we're looking for. So right now, again, the market reactions and interest rates going up is all about investor confidence and what happens with the basic fundamentals of supply and demand, because investors' demand changes when they're concerned about whether or not the Federal Reserve will hike rates again. So what Kelani means when she's asking about a hawkish standpoint is, are they going to go back to saying, hey, we're going to need to hike rates again? And if we have to hike rates again, what is that going to do to the market? Because we need to get inflation under control. Now, Jerome Powell did confirm that hiking is not on the table. And if he had not said that, then these inflation reports would have a much more significant impact on rates. So what you have to think about, and why we're going to bring up this, what the Biden administration is proposing for taxes on unrealized gains, we're going to talk about that because it's a big factor. See, the reason why the government wants to increase tax revenue is because they spend money and they print money out of thin air. So money during COVID, $5 trillion was printed out of thin air. When you hear any verbiage in the headlines about the Federal Reserve shrinking their balance sheet, that means they've retracted, let's say to keep it as simple as possible, about $1.5 trillion of that money, okay? Now, to give you an idea, if I took a money printer and I just injected $1 million into each one of your bank accounts, what would you do? Just think about what you would do. It's going to send you into a spending spree, regardless of what you're going to say in public. I know you're going to be out there spending some of that money on things you wish you had that you didn't buy.
Me,
right?
never.
So if you put $5 trillion into the market out of nowhere into the economy, what do you think happens? It grows. So the inflation rate went up to 9.1%. And right now the average inflation is, closer to 3%. So here's what we're talking about. The government has to figure out a way to increase their revenue. So if you go out and you get a car note and you got a mortgage and you got new credit card bills and you're like, oh shit, I just lost my part-time job, you're going to have to go out and figure out another replacement for that income because your expenses are still there and if not growing because of the interest rate environment, correct? So The government has the same problem on their hands. They just approved sending $61 billion to Ukraine. God knows why. And they have approved another $26 billion to go to Israel. And we are out here, our hard-earned tax dollars are funding wars, fake wars, made up wars, just entertaining wars that are happening out there that are killing massive amounts of people. And then what happens is we're paying the price on that because our taxes are going to go up and that's how they're spending their money. Because I can tell you one thing, there's not a single mother in the audience that wouldn't be raising their hand right now wishing that they had after school programs with credible healthcare workers or professionals that could care for children, enabling much more time and energy, just like they have in other countries. Or maybe healthcare programs, education programs. Why are we paying so much money for education and college education in this country, right? So there could be a lot of things that our tax dollars do with our tax dollars are put to use for. A lot of things that maybe we'd see the benefit of in our lives, but that's not happening. Now, as that balance grows and as the government continues to print money out of thin air, they got to pay for that, right? Just because they create it out of thin air doesn't mean that they're going to pay for it out of thin air. They're going to take our hard-earned money to pay for it through taxes.